I'm Dr. Andy Kaufman, recovering physician, plandemic whistleblower, natural healing pedagogue, and legal code talker. You can call me the Truth Doctor. I'm here to shift your paradigm as I perform a radical forensic dissection, discerning fact from fiction, science from pseudoscience, medicine from poison, law from legal fiction, and individualism from collectivism. This is your channel for unraveling the truth about health and science. This is the Healthy Living Livestream. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Healthy Living live stream. I am your host, Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Today, I'm going to be clearing up some myths, and misconceptions, and mischaracterizations about yet another topic, and this is inflammation. Now, I've been researching and scouring the material out there in both the mainstream medical space as well as alternative and natural healing spaces. And over again, I see some of these concepts coming from a false interpretation of some basic science or a misunderstanding that leads to conclusions about inflammation being drawn that are just not quite accurate. And what I specifically mean is that inflammation is seen as the enemy or the cause of a variety of health problems. And in both the mainstream pharmaceutical approach as well as in the natural supplement approach, we see over and over again that substances are promoted based on their anti-inflammatory properties. So I want to clear this up, hopefully once and for all, although I know I'll be saying these things again in the future about what's really going on with inflammation and what's really causing health problems. So let me just say that inflammation really is a healing mechanism, and we'll see that directly from the medical literature in just a few moments. But I want to talk about the etymology or the origin of the word. It comes from the Greek verb inflammare, which means to set on fire. Now, if we think about when this word may have first been in use and what were the scientific or health principles at that time, I think this clearly lends itself to an alchemical formulation where there are a series of steps in the alchemical transformation process, and that is a process of change. So, for example, if we have injury or damage to a tissue, there is the process of transformation of taking that damaged tissue back to healthy and functioning tissue. And the first step in this process from the alchemical formulation is called calcination, which literally refers to burning up of the old. So to set on fire certainly fits within that formulation, as well as the overall concept that it is the beginning stages of the healing or transformative process of response to some kind of insult in our body. Now, just to review a little bit of basic medical knowledge, when we're talking about inflammation, generally people talk about acute and chronic inflammation. And there are the 5 cardinal signs of inflammation, which often refer to the acute stages, but can also be present in chronic inflammation. I'm going to talk about the difference there momentarily, but let me bring up some slides here. And this first slide demonstrates these 5 cardinal signs, and they, of course, also have Latin names, which I believe is still taught to doctors and health professionals. So pain is dolor, heat is calor, redness is rubor, swelling is tumor, and then loss of function has another Latin term that's not used very much. But here we can see the familiar process that we've experienced. For example, if we had a cut or scrape, or if we had a injury to a joint, a muscle, tendon, right, like a sprain or a fracture, we've seen our body going through these stages, and they serve a variety of functions to allow the healing to take place. And I will perhaps describe that in a little more detail as we move forward. So what we have here, if we scour the popular talking heads on health issues and alternative health issues, we can find a lot of times, even in the titles of videos, but many times if you listen to a video on a certain health problem, they'll eventually get to this conclusion that inflammation is the cause of the disease. And in one video here, it says it's the cause of all disease. And another one, it relates it to a specific disease, which is anemia. Okay. Now, I think there is a problem here saying that inflammation is the cause, because inflammation is actually a normal biological process. Now, we also have a lot of information out there which talks about the causes of inflammation. Okay, now this makes sense, right? That something causes inflammation, and then inflammation is implicated in a variety of disease processes. In fact, it's quite a broad variety. But here we have from Dr. Eric Bird a list of the stated causes of inflammation. And if we look at these one at a time, we see really a lack of explanatory power. So let's go through these examples. So number one, a lack of cortisol. Now, cortisol is the steroid hormone secreted by our adrenal glands that has anti-inflammatory properties, and this is used as a drug, cortisol itself, and also related compounds like prednisone, for example. Now, if we have a lack of cortisol, what is causing that, right? Are we supposed to infer that our body is simply making a mistake and not making enough, and resulting in further damage to the body with inflammation? Right? So there's a lack of a cause of the lack of cortisol, or the primary or root cause. And my philosophy has always been that in order to reverse a health problem, we have to get to the root cause and figure out from that the appropriate strategy to allow our bodies to do the healing. Now, number two, allergies. Once again, allergies is sort of just another way of saying inflammation almost. But if allergies are the cause of inflammation, then what is the cause of the allergies? Once again, no explanatory power. Number three, manage chronic infections. Well, then what's causing the chronic infection? Now we can look at what they're talking about here. They're talking generally about so-called viral infections like Epstein-Barr virus and hepatitis C. But the assessments for those so-called chronic infections don't actually detect the infectious agent or explain why it's there and what it's doing. Number four, gut inflammation. So in other words, inflammation in part of your body causes inflammation in another part of your body. Once again, this is just restating the same thing. Five, glucose sugar. Now, this is actually something that could be a root cause of inflammation. And there is substantial evidence showing that sugars and starches are inflammatory inducing. In fact, we know that our body has mechanisms, for example, to prevent sugar from being in our blood for too long because it is toxic to the other tissues. Now, number six, fat cells. So something is disrupting the fat cell function that may cause inflammation. But once again, we don't know what is the problem with fat cells. Now, old injuries is an interesting cause here, because I have seen many cases of people with injuries that never heal. and become chronically inflamed. But this doesn't occur with all injuries. So what is the missing factor of why this occurs with some old injuries, but not, and in some people, but not all of them? So there must be something that interrupts the repair process. Problems in the bile duct. Well, what is causing the problem in the bile duct? And we see that we can go on and on here, and we have very little in the way of the root cause. All we have are other things that correlate with inflammation, but are not known to have any direct cause. Now, low vitamin D also, what would be the cause of that? Is it because of lack of sun exposure, or is it because of the cholesterol being too low, because vitamin C is made from cholesterol? So in other words, could it be cholesterol lowering drugs that are actually causing the problem and not the low vitamin D? High omega-6 and low omega-3. Well, omega-6 fatty acids, which are found in many seed oils especially, and to some degree in grain-fed meats, are known to be pro-inflammatory, although there is some further information that says it may only be the oxidized form of the omega-6s which have this problem, and those are the ones in seed oils, not in the grain-fed meat. And this makes sense with many people who are eating a carnivore diet with grain-fed meat who have resolution of autoimmune diseases, for example. Now, number 11, finally, we get somewhere: environmental toxins, except that this should really be number 1. And then frequent eating and too much iron, we will spare those. But as you can see, that there's very little on the root cause out there, and usually many other things that don't provide much actual explanatory power. So let's go to a very mainstream source just to understand exactly what inflammation is, because this information is readily available. So this is from the government, the National Institutes of Health, and it says here, inflammation is a normal part of the body's defense to injury. In this way, it is beneficial. Okay, so why are so many demonizing inflammation? And in fact, if we go further about what's going on, is that many pharmaceutical and natural healing approaches are all geared around blocking inflammation. And these include the steroid hormones that I mentioned, like cortisol and prednisone, but of course, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, which are used extensively, as you know, things like naproxen, ibuprofen, and even aspirin. Antibiotics have strong anti-inflammatory properties, as well as there are many monoclonal antibody drugs that are made to specifically suppress inflammation, and even many other classes of drugs that you wouldn't think of that are anti-inflammatory but have that effect, like statin drugs, which also lower the cholesterol and hence the vitamin D and testosterone levels. So there are many things that the mainstream medical system uses to try and turn off inflammation. But by doing that, it's turning off the beneficial effects that it's supposed to result. And here in the introduction, it says, when your body suffers an injury or infection, inflammation is a normal part of the healing process. Okay, so inflammation equals healing. Now, if we look at here from this federal agency reviewing the scientific literature, they have found a lot of associations, right? Not causation, but with chronic inflammation and various types of disease processes. Okay, so autoimmune disease, cardiovascular diseases, gastrointestinal diseases, which some of those are autoimmune, like Crohn's disease, lung disease, or they're said to be autoimmune, let me correct myself, inflammatory lung diseases like COPD and asthma, mental illness even, including depression, metabolic diseases like diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases, and cancer. Now, what are the causes of this inflammation, because if this inflammation is present and associated with all these illnesses, we would want to know what's causing that inflammation, because whatever is causing the inflammation is likely to be actually the underlying or root cause of those disease states. And here at the bottom, it says that it may result from exposure to factors such as environmental chemicals and radiation. Now, radiation is something we don't think about much because we don't live near, a nuclear reactor that blew up. We're not in an area that received, atomic weapons. So, but we do actually get a substantial exposure to radiation, and it's from medical imaging primarily. And there is a vast literature on this showing some strong relationships with cancer. So be careful about medical imaging tests. Make sure that they actually provide a substantial value. And if you are suffering with a health condition where they want you to do repeat CT scans, for example, a CT scan is a much higher dose of radiation than a plain X-ray. So these are also contributing factors to inflammation. Now, if we go further in this article, they delineate some more detailed causes, and here they're reviewing some literature on air pollution, right, which can contain many, many different things. Of course, ozone exposure is implicated with asthma and cardiovascular disease. Then we even have air pollution linked to Parkinson's disease, something that I don't think many of us would logically consider. And we also have here inflammatory bowel diseases, and they relate it to environmental neurotoxic pesticides, which are most pesticides. In fact, many of these pesticides, which are highly prevalent in the environment, are linked to a number of health problems besides inflammation. Now, there also is a vast literature on inflammation in cancer. And we have this idea that acute inflammation in response to an injury, like let's say you sprain your ankle, right? It's going to swell up, become painful, and that will continue for a few days, and you'll probably rest it because it'll hurt too much to put weight on it, and it'll resolve and get better. But in many cases, what happens is the acute inflammation does not resolve for some reason, and this is called resolution failure, because part of the resolution is the repair of the tissue. So if there's failure of resolution, then there is an indefinite delay of the repair of the tissue. So what is it that contributes to this failure of resolution, which leads to this chronic inflammatory state, which is what is associated with all these serious health conditions like cancer? So we'll come back to that in a minute. But here in this paper that reviewed chronic inflammation, it also, on the left side of this chart, lists quite a number of causes. But if we look at these closely, once again, we'll say, what is causing these problems? So here, physical inactivity. Now, physical inactivity is associated with many other lifestyle behaviors, including eating junk food, right? And it also can be a result of depression. So we have to say, what's causing the physical inactivity? Same thing with obesity, and as well as dysbiosis, which means, an imbalance of the bacteria in the gut. They're talking about, once again, what is causing that. Now, the diet here, that is a key factor and is an underlying root cause, as well as what is here in these chemical flasks, which it says xenobiotics. And we're going to see what that's referring to, the xenobiotics, is environmental chemicals. I'm not sure why they use that term. Now, here is a paper which specifically looks at this issue about resolution and chronic inflammation. And we can see here it states in the highlighted portion Recent research has revealed that certain social, environmental, and lifestyle factors can promote chronic inflammation, and those are the ones we saw in the previous chart. And then it specifically talks about diet, for example, where it's talking about highly refined grains, ultra-processed foods, specifically containing emulsifiers, that these alter the gut microbes. So that gut dysbiosis, now we have a cause, right? By eating processed and ultra-processed foods containing emulsifiers. And that this change can then result in increased intestinal permeability. So the gut can't filter out the things that aren't supposed to get inside of us. And then, of course, those things can result in further inflammation. So we see that our nutrition is vitally important, and we know that almost everyone's nutrition is very poor. Now, here is the probiotics from that chart, and they call it here environmental and industrial toxicants. And I'm going to just read the highlighted portions for you. So each year, an estimated 2,000 new chemicals are introduced. So every single year, we have 2,000 new chemicals from the industry, right? And these could be get into people by ingesting, by foods, personal care products like being absorbed through the skin, prescription drugs, obviously they're purposely putting it in the body, household cleaners through inhalation and skin absorption, and lawn care products, right, which can get on our clothes, which we could breathe in, etc. So there is a government program trying to address this. Of course, it's not very effective, but in that program, they tested more than 9,000 chemicals using more than 1,600 assays and found that numerous chemicals that people are commonly exposed to alter molecular signaling pathways that underlie inflammation and inflammation related disease risk. And these specific ones they mentioned are phthalates, which are plasticizing chemicals, also used in many fragrances that you might spray, as well as hygiene products. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, these are the forever chemicals that make up the nonstick surfaces used for cooking, as well as to repel water for waterproof textiles. Bisphenols, another plasticizing chemical, and even if something is BPA free, it's likely to contain other bisphenols which have similar toxicities. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are largely from industrial pollution, and flame retardants. And we've seen flame retardants also in other research affecting, for example, sperm morphology and function. So here, these environmental chemicals are, present in so many different places in our environment. People are commonly exposed to them. Now, it goes on to say that these compounds promote inflammatory activity through multiple mechanisms, including being directly toxic to the cells by causing oxidative stress, by being endocrine disruptors, and that there's evidence supporting a causal role in various cancers, metabolic syndrome, which is a main factor leading to strokes and heart attacks, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, allergies, asthma, autoimmune diseases, and neurodegenerative diseases. So we have all of this evidence that these toxins are involved in as the root cause of the inflammation that is implicated in all these diseases, but we have no efforts whatsoever from the mainstream medical establishment to address any of these factors with respect to an individual patient. Now, I wanted to get back to this issue about resolution of inflammation, because we know it's when the inflammation is not able to resolve and result in tissue repair is when it leads to these other serious health conditions. And I'll read the highlighted portion from this study about cancer in this issue. The resolution of inflammation is now appreciated to be an active biochemical process regulated by endogenous specialized pro-resolving lipid autocoid mediators, which combat infections and stimulate tissue repair regeneration. So let me translate that into English for you. So we're talking now about the situation where inflammation becomes chronic and cannot resolve. And they finally realized that that is actually part of the process of inflammation. So it is an active biochemical process, and that it's regulated by various things in the body, okay, which it implicates these specific types of chemical mediators with a fancy name. But more importantly, that those stimulate tissue repair and regeneration. So that is what is prevented from happening when this resolution is blocked. Now, the article goes on to say, environmental and chemical human carcinogens, including aflatoxins, asbestos, nitrosamines, alcohol, and tobacco, induce tumor-promoting inflammation and can disrupt the resolution of inflammation, contributing to a devastating global cancer burden. So it's implicating some specific toxins here that can block the resolution of inflammation. And it mentions aflatoxins, which we get exposed to through various food products, like especially peanuts and peanut butter, corn, and pistachios, due to a mold growing on those nuts and legumes while they're being stored. And it's an unregulated substance. Of course, asbestos, nitrosamines, alcohol, and tobacco, but I would venture to say that there are many more compounds than that. So we've seen here that there has been a gross misunderstanding about what inflammation really is and what's going on with its association with all these diseases. So I think I can definitively say that inflammation is not an underlying or root cause of any disease or disease process, but it is part of the process that leads to, results in a variety of serious and life-threatening health conditions. And I think the factors that lead one individual to develop condition A, B, or C are very much individualized, and in part due to the particular nature of the toxin that is causing this. So we see that it's widely recognized in the medical research literature that toxins, including those in common processed food ingredients, as well as many others, are what is not only causing the inflammation in the first place by damaging tissue, but also implicated in blocking the resolution of the inflammation. And I think that this can happen by specific toxins, as we mentioned, but also if we keep adding more of the offending agent to the body, even if our body has the capability of repairing it, right there, the burden still exists. So there's more and more damage as more and more of this toxin is put in our body, and the body can only repair, so much at a time. And this develops to the chronicity of the issue. So if we can recognize where our exposure is to a lot of these toxins and then reduce or eliminate that, which is a main part of what I teach in my broader educational offerings, that we can really allow our body to complete the healing process and resolve the inflammation, completely repair the tissue once and for all, and not worry that in the future that it's going to turn into a heart attack, a stroke, a cancer, an autoimmune disease, on and on. So how do we do this? Well, I think it is somewhat simple, but difficult to implement in our life. Is that one, we have to recognize the sources of exposure to these toxins. And for most of us, it's going to be largely from food. So we need to change what we eat, clean up our diet, get away from processed foods, get away from sugar and starches, get away from seed oils and eat real whole food. The same thing is true with our drinking water. We need to make sure that it's clean. If you're drinking tap water, then many of these toxins are present in the tap water. So distillation, reverse osmosis filtering, or finding a natural water source that you know has been tested and is free of any of these types of toxins. And then want to think about our house, going through the house room by room, thinking about the exposure to plasticizing chemicals, to cleaning chemicals, to personal hygiene chemicals. An excellent resource to help you is the Environmental Working Group's Healthy Living app, which rates thousands of consumer products, looking in detail at their ingredients and comparing that with the toxicology literature so that you can only use things that you know will be safe and help alleviate and prevent any chronic inflammation or serious health problems from your future. All right, that concludes my talk on inflammation today, but I would be happy to take a couple of questions. All right, from Freedom. What about alternating cold heat for improving healing speed of injuries, sprain, strain, trauma? I'm told that cold packs are similar, can temporarily reduce oversaturation of inflammation of tissue and allow for more blood exchange, thus more nutrients. Do you recommend using cold hot too? Now, why would the body overproduce? Why would the body make mistakes like that? So I would just ask that question because I don't think that nature provides for biological organisms to make those kinds of mistakes. I think if we as humans make mistakes, it's by our own thinking process or decision-making process. Now, it's quite interesting, this technique of applying ice to injuries that is recommended universally in the medical system. Now, you might ask, where does this come from? Well, it actually comes from experiments where dead tissue from a cadaver took longer to decompose when it was frozen. Now, we know this, right? Because this is how meat is preserved, for example. But somehow this was extrapolated to apply to injuries where perhaps it was hypothesized that the tissue dies in a way and that this may preserve it and allow it to heal in some way. But we don't really know that this provides, any actual benefit, and it doesn't really make sense to me because the acute inflammatory response is the body's innate mechanism of healing. So let's think about an acute injury like a sprain or a fracture. Well, what happens? It gets warm. Why does it get warm? It gets warm because of the blood flow. There's increased blood flow because the chemicals that are secreted in the inflammatory process cause the blood vessels, the capillaries, to dilate and get more fluid into the area. And that, of course, is warmed by the body. So it brings heat to the area. And then there's, of course, metabolism of the cells there doing their work, which all those things generate heat. And those things are required for the function. If we make it cold by applying ice, for example, then we would cause the capillaries to now constrict and decrease the blood supply, right? And that's why there might be symptomatic relief, that there might be less pain because there's less swelling because we have cut off the blood supply. But the blood supply is there to, one, bring things to help respond to the injury and to take away, things that are waste products or damaged materials. So we would theoretically be interfering with that process by applying cold. And of course, heat also, the body's already generating heat to the area. So if we add more heat, it's possible that could cause further damage. So my philosophy is to trust the body and allow it to do its thing and take the signals that you get from your body. So for example, if you try to move that injured area and it hurts to move it, that's your body telling you don't move it right now. So that's really how I would approach a situation like that. All right, Chevy 10 asks, does inflammation cause muscle weakness throughout the entire body? Well, it's possible that there could be, body-wide chronic inflammation that could be contributing to a problem with muscle weakness. I mentioned that there's evidence of the relationship between chronic inflammation and neurodegenerative diseases. So there are a variety of different labels of neurodegenerative disease that that manifest as progressive muscle weakness. And one well-known example is ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. But I don't want to, make you think you have that problem if you have some muscle weakness. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just mentioning one neurodegenerative disease. And even ALS has had some anecdotal stories of people using natural healing and having complete reversals of the disease. And if you want to learn more about that, look into the work of Dr. Rick Bedlack at Duke University, who I used to train with many years ago. All right, I think we can take another question if there is one. All right, Claudia Schulte asks, what's the role of red light and near infrared in inflammation relief? Well, I would, caution you that we should not be using any approach that reduces inflammation. We should be using an approach that addresses the underlying cause of the inflammation. So if you're thinking red light therapy will turn off the inflammation, that is not going to be helpful for real healing in the body. That would be equivalent to a pharmaceutical approach of taking steroids. So if you want to look into further what the research on red light therapy is, I just so happen to have done a previous Healthy Living live stream on that very topic, and I would direct you there to see my full opinion. All right, perhaps one more. Is there one more, Alexander? All right. Joel Calloway asks, I've got chronic shoulder inflammation that cause daily headaches and terrible discomfort. I've tried a lot. I rarely eat any processed food or carbs. I stretch, breath, and drink salt water every day. So any advice? Well, I think, one similar to the way I'd approach this with any issue is, look at what is the root cause. So was there an old injury present? Is this on both shoulders or just one shoulder? What's the pattern there? What is the relationship to that part of your body, right? If it's in your dominant hand, is it related to a sport that you used to play? And I would start there and then think about all of the possibilities of what could have been going on in the shoulder and then try to address the underlying cause. So if you've really, truly cleaned up your diet and not just eliminated processed foods, but eliminate sugars, simple carbs, and seed oils, then it could be that you need to do some kind of detoxification protocol. There could be fat-soluble toxins that are causing the inflammation to continue that you would need to address more comprehensively. I have a series of workshops on my website called the Terrain Workshops, as well as offering the True Living Fellowship membership community. And there are many, many resources with all kinds of details, as well as written protocols to further address these more serious issues. And I would encourage everyone to go to my website to further investigate all of those resources, which should be linked everywhere in this video. All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending another Healthy Living live stream. And hopefully I cleared up a lot of the misunderstanding around inflammation and gave you some tips on how to address inflammation in your own body today, and I look forward to seeing you for the next Healthy Living live stream.